This is a production of Cornell University.
All right, so it's my great pleasure to introduce our plenary speaker this afternoon. So we have Dr. Sharon Weiner. Sharon is joining us from Purdue University Libraries, where she holds the only known endowed professor position on information literacy. So it's wonderful to have her here. The title of her talk today is The State of Information Literacy Policy, a Global Priority. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Sharon Weiner.
Thank you, Sharon. It's such a privilege to be here, to be able to speak to you today about a topic that I'm very passionate about, and I'd like to share with you and get your impressions of as well. And that is information literacy around the globe. Sharon asked me to talk about that topic, but also to talk about my position also, because it is an unusual position. And so that's what I plan to talk with you about today. So let me see which microphone is going to work better here. So the outline for my talk is talking a little bit about my position, and I'm hoping that it will inspire others to create such positions or get funding for such positions in your own environments. And then talking about the state of information literacy around the globe. First of all, developing a common understanding of what information literacy is, what information policy is, and then the global challenges associated with information policy, international information literacy policy, which is a subset of information policy, and then taking action, because I think this conference is much about taking action. I think you're examining what the issues are, and you're mobilizing yourselves to figure out ways to address some of these issues. That's the best thing about conferences like this. So my position is called the W. Wayne Booker Chair in Information Literacy at Purdue University, and it's based in the libraries there. So I'd like to tell you about Mr. Booker, who donated the funding for this position, and what his background was and why he made a significant donation relating to information literacy. Mr. Booker was an alum of Purdue. He graduated from the business school at Purdue, and he went on to become eventually an executive at the Ford Motor Company. And what he found was he was hiring bright young people into the workplace at Ford. But within a couple of years, their knowledge was becoming obsolete, and they didn't know how to continue to update their knowledge. And so he did some investigation about what this was all about, what it was called, and how he could fix it. And he learned about information literacy and eventually connected up with the dean of the libraries at Purdue, Jim Mullins, and then made a donation to the library so that somebody would always be paying attention to information literacy, how important it was for people to be able to find and use information and engage in lifelong learning and be prepared for be competitive in the workforce. So that's the background on Mr. Booker. I came into my position 4 years ago, and as the first person in the position, I've been kind of figuring out as I go along, and other people have been figuring it out with me as we go along. A lot of people ask me, well, what exactly do you do? I'm not an information literacy coordinator. We have an information literacy coordinator in the libraries. And basically, I felt to be true to Mr. Booker's intent for the donation, I should be looking at information literacy outside of the libraries. There are a lot of people paying attention to what happens with information literacy in academia, in libraries, but not so much outside of libraries. And really that was what Mr. Booker was thinking about, was how do you transfer that knowledge of how to find and use information from libraries to once you get into the workplace or in everyday life. So that's where I've been focusing my energies. I tend to work more on a university-wide level, on committees, and in promoting and advocating for information literacy at the university. I also work as vice president of the National Forum on Information Literacy with organizations and other stakeholders who are interested in promoting information literacy throughout the whole lifespan. So that's pretty much my background. It's a very exciting position because every day is new, and I don't know what new opportunities are going to be coming along, and it just makes my job full of change and very dynamic. I am engaged in research about information literacy, and it tends to be on the organizational level and the policy level. And one of the opportunities that came up since I came to Purdue was working with the Purdue University Press, which reports to the libraries at Purdue. And the head of the press was very receptive to an idea that I had of an information literacy handbook series. And that handbook series is about integrating information literacy into disciplines. So I would encourage any of you who are interested in putting together a book proposal about integrating information literacy into agriculture to submit a proposal. We're going to be reviewing proposals in the fall, and the first book in the series is coming out later this year. It's called Using Information in the Engineering Design Process. So think about how you would integrate information literacy in agriculture, and take a look at our requirements, or send me an email, and I can send you the guidelines for the proposal. I work on international collaborations. I work with information literacy in the workforce and everyday life. And then I'm at a stage of my career where I have the privilege of doing a lot of mentoring of people in the profession, consulting, writing, and program development and assessment for information literacy. So that's my job. So first of all, let's talk about what information literacy is, because when you say the term information literacy, it's very likely we have 100 different opinions here about what information literacy is. And we use those words commonly throughout the library profession and outside the library profession, but I think we're not always talking about the same thing. So these are all related terms to information literacy that are out there. Information literacy and critical thinking are very closely related. If you look at definitions of both of them, it's hard to tell them apart. And certainly you could say information literacy contributes to critical thinking, that to be a critical thinker you have to be information literate. But they're very closely related. And then problem solving is another area that's related. Informed learning is a way of expressing information literacy used in the educational environment, and Christine Bruce is doing a lot of work in that area in Australia. Lifelong learning is another term related to information literacy. Competitive intelligence is what they use in the business world. Evidence-based practice tends to be more used in the health professions. UNESCO is favoring the term media and information literacy to emphasize the necessity for technology in collaboration with knowing how to find and use information. And then there are all those other specific types of literacy, health literacy, financial literacy, that all seem to come under the umbrella and be specific applications of information literacy. So those are different terms that are related to information literacy, but here is, there are some ways that people think about it, and I think librarians tend to think about it, in my experience, in a very narrow way, that it's teaching skills with using information, and the purpose is success in a course. I think the library profession, for some reason, has adopted this as their own. This is their part of information literacy. Another way to look at it is teaching a range of competencies and the purpose is life success. So it's not just skills and using a particular database or resource or finding it or finding a book on the shelf. It's a much larger, more holistic kind of way of looking at information literacy. The American Library Association defined information literacy back in 1989, long time ago, as information literate people are people who know how to learn. They've learned how to learn. So this concept is coming back now. We're coming around to this again in libraries also, where information literacy does have this broad definition. It's not just a very narrow teaching of skills. And people know how to learn because they know how knowledge is organized. They know how to find information, how to use information, and they can always find the information needed for any task or decision at hand, not just for academic work, but also for whatever situation they're dealing with in their life. So I like to think of information literacy as a habit of mind or a way of thinking. When you're faced with a problem or a challenge or a decision, it's a way of thinking about what information source can I use or sources can I use that are going to help me resolve this? And you go to the best sources and you know how to synthesize and analyze the information and you know how to communicate it in the appropriate venue. So it's a way of thinking about information. It's been defined as a critical competency. In the United States, in the higher educational system, information literacy is a competency that is called a core competency, and many universities are adopting it as a major focus of their educational programs. And so it's recognized that it is necessary for educational success. Many employers in the United States, and I think elsewhere too, are doing studies about, there have been many studies of employers that indicate that they feel that people coming into the workplace do not have the skills to succeed in their jobs. And they're defining some of those missing skills, the gaps, as not knowing how to find and use information that's appropriate for the purpose that they need it for, oral and written communication skills, problem solving, and all of these we know are related to information literacy. So quite a few organizations have done studies over the last 5 years that come up with that same result. So now that we know that there's a problem, we need to think about how to address that problem. And then also we know that information literacy is a necessary competency for everyday life. Health literacy is an area that I'm particularly interested in. I worked in a health sciences library for many years and worked with people who were dealing with health conditions and needed information. So health literacy, it's a very important area because it affects us all personally in one way or another. And health literacy is one of the literacies that actually has been studied pretty thoroughly, and there's a pretty good body of knowledge about it. This is because the National Library of Medicine and the National Institutes of Health have put money into research about health literacy, so there are health literacy assessments, and there are programs, lots of programs to address health literacy needs. So there is research about health literacy. So next, let's talk about what is information policy. Information policy is actually a very large area, and if you talk to different people who are working in this area, they will define it differently because it doesn't have one overriding body that gives you the definitive definition of it. So it really encompasses a lot of different things, including laws, regulations, doctrinal positions, and other societal decisions. So these are decisions that affect large groups of people. And they're all related to the creation of information, information processing, information flow, access, and use. So information literacy would be part of this because it's about access, use, and flow and creation. So information literacy, or information policy, it's involved with a lot of different areas: technology, communications, law, government, medicine, education, business, and economics. A lot of dispersed areas. It's kind of like agriculture. What I'm hearing today is that agriculture touches a lot of different areas. So it's complex and multidimensional. And information policies can either facilitate access to information or they can impede access to information. So there are categorizations of information policy and putting all of these groups, all of these different facets of information policy into different hierarchies and all. But being information policy is something that a lot of other fields are dealing with. As a librarian, I looked at all of those areas that it's dealing with, and it really seems to come down to three aspects from my perspective. So I call these Weiner's categories. So the first one is information infrastructure, and that's the part that is probably the easiest part to deal with. It's about the technologies for being able to access and use information, the hardware and the connectivity. The next one is information resources, and that's the content. And librarians deal with this aspect a lot. It's about open access, it's about legally and ethically using information. Then the last category is information literacy, and that's about finding and using the information that you have out there. The competencies to effectively and efficiently find, use, and manage information for specific purposes. So when you look at those three big buckets, information literacy is the part that is, information resources and information literacy have had less attention on them than information infrastructure. And I think that's because it's pretty easy for an organization to put money toward technology. They see something tangible for it. They can document, easily provide data about how many computers or how much connectivity or this kind of thing. Resources, those are important. There are a lot of resources out there, but there are missing resources too. In the literature, I see that there's a need for better collecting of data in countries about key aspects that would enable more funding to go into those countries. Information literacy is about the education aspect, and that's harder to quantify, whether somebody does have those information literacy skills. We've had many attempts over the last decades to develop tests for information literacy, and none of them is really quite good enough. They just don't measure the wholeness of information literacy. So that's harder to document when you're putting money toward programs. Information policy also varies considerably from one nation to another and also within nations. And I'll give you one example is in the state where I am living now, Indiana, which is a rural Midwestern United States state. 25% of the homes don't have computers. And there also is not ubiquitous access to the internet in the state of Indiana. So it's not just, you can't make a judgment about, it is within nations also that this kind of inequity exists. Information policy can be inconsistent, overregulated, or completely lacking. It can be developed as needed or as problems arise. And it's probably better to have policy that comes up as you're anticipating issues that might come up, but what usually happens is the policies arise because of problems that happen. And then someone feels, an organization or a government feels that they have to fix that problem, and they do it through enforcing or enacting policies. So rather than a coordinated, cohesive manner with all major stakeholders participating. This is a quote from the director of UNESCO in Bangkok. And the quote is, "How well an individual, an organization, and an entire society can harness, access, share, and make use of available information," which is information literacy, "will ultimately decide their ability to generate economic growth and enhance the quality of life for all." So those are pretty important aspects of information literacy. So if you think about it, if you have a society or a community where everybody can access and share information, and there's collaboration among all the stakeholders, the communities, the societies, as well as other stakeholders involved, you can really, really have the solution or the ground for sustainable and effective solutions to global problems, because we know that problems need to be solved on a community level. That community-based problem solving is the best way to go, because that's what's sustainable. But you've got to have those other pieces too, the ability for everybody to have access to and be able to find and use information, and then that collaboration. And this comes from a policy brief that I wrote last year, which is on the Purdue website. The policy brief is about the role of information policy in resolving and addressing global challenges. And the quote is, inequity in access, so this is the opposite of the previous slide, inequity in access to information and inadequate training in how to use information worldwide hampers the collective problem solving that could lead to dynamic, innovative results. So if you look at this slide, if you look at the pictures in this slide, you see people in the workplace all around the world, and you can see that there are some commonalities in all of these pictures. Technology is a commonality. Also, people working together. And you can see the guy on the end very overwhelmed, which is a common state with the volume of information that's available. And in this picture, we have pictures of our children. And each one of them is using a computer. Even the little toddlers are using computers. This is a typical classroom at Purdue. And I show you this picture because it goes against what was in the previous slides. If you look at kids using technology, technology in the workplace, working together, and then you look at a classroom where everybody is sitting in rows, quiet, listening to the professor teaching, that does not prepare them for the abilities that they need once they get into the workforce. So this is one of our challenges that we have. Our educational system needs to catch up to what the needs are of the 21st century workforce. At Purdue, we've got some great initiatives going on where we are redesigning space in the libraries for active learning of students and collaborative work. We're actually building a new building on campus that's going to be a combined classroom and library where there are no boundaries between the library and the classroom. There will be one space. And that's kind of unusual. But it's all around this idea of active learning. It's very hard to change a classroom like this into a space that's going to allow for collaborative work. And so what we're finding is that you really have to start fresh with a new building. So there are many issues related to international information literacy policy. First of all, it needs to be better recognized that information literacy and information is necessary for development. And the technology is not enough. The technology is important, but if people don't know how to use the technology to its fullest capability, then they're not going to be able to, the technology is not going to be sufficient for them. There are limited capacities, resources, and infrastructure. There are restrictions on access to information in some locations, and there's a limited amount of information in the public domain. This is coming to a head with the open access movement and publishers' reactions to open access to information, but really that hinders global problem solving. We need better organization for the resources that are existing. I know you're having a poster session here at the conference on something called DataBib, which is an effort to compile data sets and provide access through one portal to data sets. That's one of the initiatives that are happening for better organization. There's more happening with text processing of large masses of information also. And I think I think that's going to be one of the next frontiers is through text processing of information. So, you know, if you have 20,000 articles on a topic, a computer will do the analysis of what those articles are actually about and be able to synthesize and extract what is important to know about those articles. There are insufficient libraries, and there's more of a need for databases for industrial, scientific, and statistical information. Also, with information literacy, there are varying opinions on who should be responsible for it. Is it a responsibility of the educational sector? Should the workplace be responsible for information literacy? Some employers are saying that individuals are responsible for their own information literacy, that they need to find and have those skills themselves. There's a need for respect for cultural and linguistic diversity. Right now, English speakers have access to much more information than people who don't speak or read the English language. And there's a lack of awareness of the need for long-term preservation of information, lack of coordination among stakeholders. People in policy positions change as governments change. And so you're starting over again with your educational process with them when there's a change in government. The NGOs have a long history of developing recommendations related to information policy. And when I was preparing this, I put together a timeline, which I'm not going to show you because it's just too much text on the screen. But it's very clear from 1974 on, there have been lots of policy recommendations related to information literacy among the NGOs. UNESCO in particular, they have done a lot of work with information literacy. And in 1974, I use that year because that's the year that Paul Zurkowski coined the term information literacy. That's the first time it was used. And so from then on, there have been lots of summits all over the world, and they've come out with declarations and proclamations about the need for information literacy, for lifelong learning, for workforce readiness, economic competitiveness. There have been quite a few of them. Oh, yeah, but what I was going to say about that is there have been all these proclamations and recommendations, but there hasn't been subsequent enough change, I think, is what I want to say. So, you know, people recognize that there's a problem. Organizations recognize that there's a problem, but then how to address that problem is the issue. So most countries don't have a coordinated, well-planned strategy that involves multiple stakeholders. Prioritizing of information literacy is important, and sufficient funding to address both ICT and the creation of relevant resources and information literacy. So what I want to do is give you a little bit of a sampling of different countries and what is happening with information literacy policy in those countries. And most of what I'm telling you comes from the literature, and it comes from the policy brief that I wrote. So that's my disclaimer. So in the United States, I'm using that one first because that's the one I know the best, but it's not the best. It's not the best example of information literacy policy. There is no coordinating body for information policy in the United States. There are different organizations and governments that create policy, and so they can be conflicting or incompatible or non-existent. Many educational institutions and accrediting organizations do include information literacy as a standard. And so this is great progress. What it means is that educational organizations are being judged on how well they incorporate information literacy into their curriculum. That's a big step, and that's really important. As vice president of the National Forum on Information Literacy, we started a project a couple of years ago, actually it was in 2009, actually it happened first. We thought, let's get more policy attention on information literacy. And so one easy way to do that was for us to recommend to the President of the United States that he issue a proclamation declaring October to be Information Literacy Awareness Month. Very simple thing, but it would get the attention of policymakers, even if for a very short period of time. So we worked through our legislators to have that happen. It did happen in 2009, and that was a big accomplishment. Somebody in that policy office in the president's cabinet had to read the proclamation that we wrote, had to understand what information literacy was, why it was important, and then have President Obama issue the proclamation. So we thought when we got that done, we were really proud and happy and excited about it, but we thought, well, why stop with President Obama and the United States? We'll get proclamations from all 50 states in the United States and the US territories. So we started on that initiative. So it's a grassroots kind of initiative because librarians are going through their legislators in each of the states. We've got 20 proclamations right now from 20 states, and they are educating their governor's offices about information literacy, drafting recommendations for Information Literacy Month, and their governors are issuing proclamations, and we haven't had anybody say no or that they don't want to do it. It doesn't take a lot of work. It's a great effort, and it's starting to raise attention of policymakers about information literacy. So some countries are interested in doing this too. We've had inquiries from other countries about how you go about doing this. So we may see some other countries issuing such proclamations too. So the advantage of this is that it recognizes information literacy as not just an educational issue, but a societal issue. It takes it out of the library and out of the schools and into the larger society. Also, it gives policymakers notice about emerging issues. They want to know, what are the things that people are talking about and people are interested in. So this was a way to get their attention on information literacy, even if it was brief. So what President Obama said in his proclamation about Information Literacy Month was, the ability to seek, find, and decipher information can be applied to countless life decisions, whether financial, medical, education, or technical. So again, took it out of the schools and the libraries and into the larger society. Here is a country that I think is doing a really exemplary job of information literacy policy, and that is Wales. And they've been working on this for several years now, and it was a concerted effort. They had a group of stakeholders together, both people in libraries and people in other areas, business, government, and they developed a plan for making information literacy ubiquitous in their country. So they've got it into their curriculum of the schools, and also their credit and qualifications framework for Wales, which is a document that says information literacy, among other things, should be happening throughout life, that people should be developing those skills throughout life. And it's based on the United Kingdom 7 Pillars model of information literacy. In Africa, can't generalize about all of Africa, but there's one article about Africa that talks about Francophone Africa. And it says, ICT and digitization are not well developed yet, so information literacy tends to cover the use of print resources. And there's no national information policy among the countries, but the governments recognize the importance this is Kenya, the second one was Kenya, but the government recognizes the importance for problem solving and economic development. In Latin America, it usually happens in the post-secondary institutions, but it's not usually part of the curriculum. And there's little information literacy activity in the schools, none in public libraries or the private sector. There's a European network on information literacy that has links to information policy in all of the countries. And when I say information policy, often when you are looking at documents about information policy, some of them are including information literacy and some are not. It's not consistent, and some of them consider them equivalent and some don't. So that can be a little bit confusing. But there are a lot of links there so you can see what's happening in the different countries in Europe. The United Kingdom incorporated information policy into a cabinet-level office, and different departments address developing the citizens' skills, promoting media literacy, and then libraries, medias, and broadcasting are part of that also. Finland has been a leading knowledge-based economy since the 1990s. They were actually one of the leaders, and the reason that it occurred is because there was strong governmental support for this and mechanisms put in place to make this happen. So they also had mechanisms for national consensus on how they should handle these things. So their leaders in their government and the other stakeholders attended programs to educate themselves about how to develop consensus and about policy management and national strategy issues. So it was a very organized effort and a very successful effort. The Prime Minister chaired the Information Society Council. So you can see it's a different approach than some other places have taken. So in addressing the issues, I think it's good for each of you to think about what you can do, because you can do things personally about policy. You could be one of those people who starts getting people together to recommend an Information Literacy Awareness Month. I mean, that's one thing that can happen. Or you can be working with your governors and your legislators, with your organizations that you're involved in. This organization is a great place to think about doing this. So there are all those ways that you could help develop information literacy policy and make information literacy ubiquitous so that we have the mechanism to address global problems. One thing we need to do is recognize that in education policy, that education is really a progressive continuum throughout your whole life. Even little ones. I met somebody recently who is very interested in working with preschoolers on information literacy. And she said, I don't think anybody is doing this. She says, I don't think people are, these little kids are using iPhones, but do they think about how they're using them, or, whether they're effective at using their iPhones, and how do they find information? What do they think about it? And I don't really think anybody that I know of is doing this. So anyway, education is a spectrum from those little ones on up through seniors who need different types of information to help them in different stages of lives. So then if we think of it as a progressive continuum, we as librarians are thinking about preparing people for for life, not just for passing a course. We wouldn't be thinking of education in terms of modules that they pass and they move on and forget what they learned in that module. And I think we have this issue with transferability from the different types of educational systems that we have, from primary to secondary to college. It seems like students come into college and they've forgotten a lot of what they learned in high school. We know they're getting it there, but they seem to forget it. So I think thinking of education as a continuum is important. And then teacher education is another really important area. Those are the people who are preparing our kids, and librarians are working with school children, but the teachers are working with them very closely too, and I think it's important that those teachers are well prepared, that they feel that they have the information literacy competencies themselves, but also that they're able to teach information literacy and integrate it into the courses that the classes that they're teaching the students. So this is where a partnership and collaboration can come into play. Teacher education is under a lot of fire. They have a very full curriculum, very packed curriculum, but I think there are ways to incorporate information literacy that won't add a burden. It will actually help them. We can communicate the importance of information literacy to stakeholders. That could be in many different venues. It could be a letter to a newspaper, or speaking at your public library, or a whole lot of ways that you can communicate the importance of information literacy. And then working with communities on information literacy. So one thing I found that we need more stories. I mean, I think all of us have stories about information literacy and how lack of information literacy affected a decision of somebody that we know, maybe an administrator that we work for, or a health issue that somebody was dealing with. I think we need to collect these stories. So what happens when you have lack of information literacy? What are the consequences? I think we all know it has consequences, but I don't think we've collected the data to tell that story. So we need data on the cost of lack of information literacy, real data. If you look at the literature about health literacy, they have actual data that shows that people who have lower health literacy have poorer health, they have more difficulty controlling their diseases, they're less likely to participate in disease prevention programs, and they're more likely to be hospitalized and actually have greater mortality. So if we had data like that about information literacy and the consequences of not having information literacy, I think that would help make our case more convincing. And then there's also data about financial literacy, and I think the global economic crisis has put more attention on financial literacy and the need to have abilities to manage money. And one study showed that a person's standard of living is related to their financial resources that they have plus financial literacy. So it's not just having the money, it's knowing how to use the money also. So in conclusion, I would say information literacy around the globe has mixed success. I think we've made a lot of progress since 1974 when the term was first coined, but we do have a ways to go yet. And so in considering your theme of your conference, emerging priorities for scientific information and food security in particular, I think what we should think about is that this ubiquitous ICT, if we had that, if we had the right resources, and if we had competency with using and finding information, then we would have the groundwork for community-based solutions to global issues. And I think it would be so appropriate for your organization to begin to think about how to do this in a very coordinated, systematic manner where you're influencing policy decisions to make this happen. So the priorities for scientific information as I see it are the creation and organization of digital resources. We have a lot out there, but there's still gaps. What is out there is not well organized or easy to find. And then teaching people how to use and find information in all of its forms, including data and visual information and oral information for a specific purpose. So what can you influence your professional organizations to do? How can you influence your communities, societies, and your governments? Any questions? Thank you. I think there's a microphone up here.
Okay. Thank you so much. I talk pretty loud. Thank you so much for your talk. I'm Mark Kesselman from Rutgers University. And I don't like the term information literacy. I do like the term information empowerment, much more. And I was very much swayed in my thinking when I attended the National Federation of Advanced Information Services, conference this year, and talking to non-librarians and hearing people say that it's all about conversations, that there's so much stuff, out there, and it's so much stuff that's disorganized, and that very often when we try to organize information, we are pushing information in a particular way that might not be the way that our users use the information. And what we might be better off doing is teaching our users how to filter information for themselves and creating their own personal filters rather than pushing information the way that we think they should have it. So in some ways, empowering our users. The other point I want to make is very often we look at certain disciplines in a vacuum. And I was involved with a grant at Rutgers where we looked at food scientists and that there was a need for leaders in the state of New Jersey, but you needed people in food science that could speak to people in business and vice versa, because they come from different, they come from different perspectives, they use different vocabularies, and very often I think one of the things that can happen in the university atmosphere is this mixing up, of students from different disciplines, that a lot of wonderful things come out. I mean, I have one faculty member that I deal with that she's teaching a course. She said she's an animal scientist, and she says, my chair doesn't know what I do. And she teaches this course, Science and Society, where she has football players, she has students in the arts, she has students in literature, and they come up with wonderful things where these students, did something on comfort food, through poetry and art. And they make so much more of a case. And they did research, based on this together. So they're sharing information amongst each other. And we don't have enough sharing of information. And I'm finding more and more, that we as librarians, we try to compact things, we try to, in our websites, we say this is the way to find information, and instead of empowering our users more, because they can find information in a variety of different ways. And maybe that's what we should be talking about, is really information empowerment rather than information literacy.
I like that idea a lot. That's a great term. I think people have been trying to come up with an alternative to information literacy since it was first coined, and nobody has come up with something that's universally acceptable, but that's a good point. There was a man from Zimbabwe who talked this morning at one of the sessions. Yes, he's in the back. And he talked about information elitism and how librarians' roles really need to change from being these guardians of information to empowering people is basically what, I hope I'm interpreting that correctly. But yeah. Yeah, so I think we've been in a mindset of wanting to hold on to all of this stuff, but we need to be working with the stakeholders and with the communities to develop solutions or empower them. I like that. That's a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. I have one quick question. I think in relation to information literacy, for me, instead of doing information literacy as an add-on on the side, there should be some mechanism, way to, you mentioned the integration is a key, the holy grail piece. But how do you know any model, or do you guys see at Purdue have some initiatives around integrating information literacy as part and parcel of the academic activity from early on through higher education, or including agriculture?
Well, we're doing something at Purdue. We're adopting the informed learning way of information. So we are pretty much eliminating the classes where we come in and guest lecture. And we are embedding information literacy in the courses. This is actually part of a large university course transformation project. It's more than a project now because it's received stable funding from the provost's office. But these large lecture type classes that are not really working, and a lot of students fail out, and they've decided we've got to make those classes successful. And so the provost has put money into teaming up faculty with librarians, IT people, instructional development people. And so we are at the table with inserting information literacy into these courses. They're all large foundation courses. So it's really kind of a lot of events came together perfectly for this to happen. and for us to be able to work. And we've also developed a core curriculum over the last couple of years also that includes information literacy both at a foundational level and embedded into the curriculum. So it's just it's been a great opportunity and a great time to be there for all these things to be happening. So that's how it's working at Purdue. But I don't think there's one solution for every school. I think each school is different, and what's the dynamics of what is happening at each school are different. So it's good to strategize with people. I'd be happy to talk with you, or I'm sure other people could talk with you also about how you can make it happen at your school, how you can push that agenda forward more. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very impressed your speech. Thank you so much. Didn't you mention in the Asian cases that I came from Japan? In Japan, the information literacy, term of the information literacy is very popular in the course of the universities. But the meaning is a little different. In Japan, the information literacy, the course of information literacy, mainly focusing to the computer literacy. My thinking to my question to you didn't mention the computer literacy, but information literacy based on the computer literacy. It's very important for if nowadays most of the information and content is on the webs. How to retrieve, how to use the computer is very important for in Japan nowadays. Most of the university courses, most of the university have the information literacy courses. But mainly focusing to major part of the information literacy is focusing to the computer literacy. In the case of the United States, the course of the information literacy, not so much focusing to the computer literacies, only to focusing to the how to searching and the retrieving of the content. Thank you so much.
That's one of those issues where we're using the same terms, but we're meaning different things. And some people who talk about information literacy do mean computer literacy. I realize it's very important to have computer literacy, and I think in the United States now there's an assumption that students have computer literacy because they're so facile with the devices that they're using. And we know that's not always true. That's not completely true. But there are societies in the world that are oral societies that do not have and use those technologies. And so I think we need to think about what information literacy means in a society that's an oral culture that is not it's communicating through oral ways, not through technology. So that's why I believe that computer literacy is a very important part of it, but it's not all over the world like that.
Okay. Thank you.
My name is Deva Reddy. I am from Texas A&M University. My question is, at the outset, I would like to mention, instead of information literacy, after all, information is for survival when we are talking of that one. So information functional literacy, it should be called functional literacy. And when we say functional literacy, you also mentioned that you called for some suggestions as far as the agriculture is concerned, like medicine and other things. When you say agriculture, for providing functional literacy in agriculture, is it the job of the librarians or the information scientists to provide that one? Because unlike in the developed countries like United States or UK, but in developing countries, we have a very well-knit organization. The extension programs are there. Agricultural extension programs are there, up to the county level, up to the village level, and all they are there. They are all extension officers. In fact, there was a system, World Bank supported a program called training and visit system, where actually they have the contact farmers. The contact farmers are trained, and in turn, the contact farmers go to the villages, actual farmers, and provide the information. So when such a system exists, is it necessary again for the librarians de novo to go there and also provide information? After all, our resources, our knowledge and everything is very limited. So is it possible for the librarians So my suggestion is, probably what we can think of, we can only provide information to that extension persons. Extension personnel we can provide, if at all they want. But it's not my job to go to the farmer and provide the job. Thank you.
Okay, that is a question that I don't really feel qualified to answer, and I think there are people in this audience who would have opinions about this one way or the other. Does anybody want to comment?
I've been teaching a course on information literacy, and most of it was about finding things. So it's the traditional library thing of using the catalog and then document delivery, and it's a bit more modern. It's still a very messy story, and people can use Primo, as we call it, global search, but then Scopus is not in. And if you explained all this, then, half of a day is as we finished. And then I've only discussed finding information. I got the question, okay, I've found a lot, and I've a lot of PDFs, and now what do I do? I felt a bit cheap when I said, okay, go to your supervisor and have a strategy. But do we, as, let's say, information professionals, have a better answer of using, or as Barack Obama called it, deciphering information? Thank you.
I think we definitely have a role in teaching people to find and use and manage information. But doing it as part of their coursework or something that has something that's situated, that has a context, I think is the best way for them to learn it. Does that help?
Okay. Well, I'll just add that at the University of Arizona, we have a one-credit online course, Information Research Strategies for Graduate Students and Researchers, and we do try to address the range of info-lit goals, although, again, to get their attention and be of immediate or practical use, we do sort of emphasize the searching and then the management once they get the results of just keeping track of things. But it is, I think, important to not just restrict yourself to the sort of technical aspects, but we include things on ethics and of information policy, open access issues, copyright, all those other things. So it's interesting how many of them, even at the graduate student level, find it like totally new and valuable information that they apparently made it through college without really absorbing. So yeah.
This has been a production of Cornell University. On the web at cornell.edu.